Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to start a replay with a review copy of the Shores of Tripoli, the 2020 game from Fort Circle Games about the First Barbary War. Now we're going to take the side of the US forces, and there are solo rules for the Tripoli forces. So we're going to see if we can contain their raiders in the Mediterranean and then put enough military pressure to bear on their stations in Tripoli to force them to sign a favorable peace treaty to the US. Now, normally I'd kind of like to have an episode 0 where we cover some of the key mechanics and the rules of the game. But the game is accessible enough that I think we can jump right in with episode 1 and get started and then explain things as we go along. So let's jump right in. It's 1801 and we're in charge of the US forces. Let's do a quick overview of the battle. So it's going to be a 6-year campaign, and each year consists of 4 seasons. So there's 24 seasons in this campaign. It might end before 24 seasons play out, but that's the longest it can go. Of course, we again are representing the U.S. forces. Right now, all we have are these 3 frigates in the harbor of Gibraltar. Tripoli has a much stronger position at the beginning of the war. They have 2 corsairs in Gibraltar and 5 in Tripoli. These forces, by the way, as an aside, exist peacefully because Britain controls that harbor at the moment, so we can't fight each other there. Now, we can win by wiping out Tripoli or by setting up the conditions by which we force Tripoli to sign a peace treaty that's favorable to the U.S. But our victory conditions don't come into play early in the game, because early in the game, the biggest part of the game right now is that Tripoli can successfully raid merchant ships in the Mediterranean, and if they do that very well, they win the game pretty early. And this is symbolized by these 12 gold coins that you can see that I've laid out across the top of the map here. If Tripoli raids successfully 12 times, essentially symbolizing kind of the sinking of the capturing of 12 merchant ships, then they win the game immediately. So our first task in the early couple years of the game as the US forces is to try to stop Tripoli from successfully raiding and getting these 12 gold coins. So that is the kind of the focus of the early part of the game. Now, we're going to be playing as the human player as the US. We can see down here, and I'll explain these more as we go along, Tripoli is going to be using an AI bot rules. So we're going to be following kind of a procedural set of circumstances by which we manage the Tripoli forces, and then we can do whatever we want. Each turn, or each season in the game, basically the player is going to play a card and then take an action. The US player goes first, followed by the Tripoli player. And it goes back and forth over the course of the 24 seasons. So the sequence of play is relatively straightforward. So now that we kind of understand the overview and what we're trying to do as the US, basically stop Tripoli from successfully raiding, let's take a look at the US cards and decide our first play for the spring of 1801. Okay, so here we are, 1801, the spring. These are the playing options that we have as the US player in this game. Now, the top 3 cards that you can see here are called the core cards. They're always available to the US player at the beginning of the game and throughout the game. This one here, Swedish Frigates Arrive, we're going to play this one relatively soon because it's going to enlist the Swedish Navy to help us in preventing Tripoli from raiding. These 2 cards are useful later in the game. Unfortunately, the rules even mention this. They say if the US player draws some conditional cards, especially land battle cards, it can be really tough in the early going for them. And unfortunately, that's kind of what we did. Of these 6 cards that we were dealt at the beginning of 1801, I really think only one of them here, this Show of Force, which is very helpful if Tripoli enlists the support of allies. So we're going to keep this one. This is really the only card that we can use in 1801. So the rest of these cards aren't very helpful, which brings us to the point of what you can do with a card. As a player, as a US player now in this game, we can do one of 3 things with the card. We can either play the event that's listed there, or we can discard a card and move 2 of our frigates anywhere we want to in the game, or we can discard a card and build a gunboat in Malta, which is useful for kind of increasing our offensive power later in the game. So we don't really have good options to do anything yet. We are going to discard this Assault on Tripoli card and move 2 of our frigates. So let's go see what our actions are. And now, when we discard a card like this, we're going to have access to it later in the game, so it's not out of play for the whole game. We can actually, as it gets later in the game, there's mechanics that allow you really to bring back into play any event card that you've discarded that you haven't used yet. So we don't have to worry about not having access to that card when we need it. We just don't need it right now. So that's the card that's getting tossed out, and let's take a look at our actions. So we can move 2 frigates anywhere we want to. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to take one of our frigates from Gibraltar and we're going to pull it out into the harbor of Gibraltar. And I'll explain why now, actually. So the way the AI rules work for the forces of Tripoli is that if this is undefended, these 2 Corsairs will be free to move to Tripoli and you'll add them to Tripoli's raiding force. So we're going to put 1 frigate here just to jam up these 2 ships. It seems like a good investment for us to prevent these 2 Corsairs from, at least initially in the game, slipping the net and getting to add to the forces of Tripoli. So that's one of our moves. Now we're going to take the second frigate. So as part of our move there, we're going to move this lone frigate into the harbor outside the harbor of Tripoli to patrol this area. This is how the U.S. basically kind of hinder Tripoli's raiding. Now, this isn't ideal. Ideally, I'd like to have 2 frigates here, especially in this first turn. As we'll see, this leaves Tripoli in a very strong position in the early part of the war here. It's not optimistic this is going to work out so well. But that's the U.S. turn. Let's go to the Tripoli turn for the spring of 1801. Without going into too much detail on these cards that we see in front of us, this is basically Tripoli's kind of method of play. We start here at the top left, and if the conditions work to play any of these cards, we're going to play these cards. If it doesn't, then we draw a card from Tripoli's play deck, and then there are other reasons where this might lead us to this action over here. These 6 cards that we see down here are battle cards that come into play in the middle of turns based on certain circumstances. So, without any further ado, the biggest that we need to take a look at is what's called this 5 Corsair check, which basically says that if there are 5 Corsairs in the harbor of Tripoli, they're going to raid. And the reason why this one is important is this is kind of the hinging mechanic on which Tripoli's navy is going to work. Because right now, none of these 4 cards, without going into the details here on these, none of these 4 cards is Tripoli's condition set for. So they're immediately going to go to this 5 Corsair check and they are going to raid. So let's start now with the spring of 1801 with Tripoli's first attempted raid into the Mediterranean. So here's how raiding works in the game. Basically, it's a 2-step process. The first is that the Corsairs that are in the harbor of Tripoli are going to slip into this patrol zone and try to break free into the Mediterranean. The U.S. or Swedish forces, if they happen to be here, can then get a chance to intercept the Corsairs. And the way that's symbolized in the game is through dice rolls. Each frigate gets to roll 2 dice, and on a die roll of 6, one of the Corsairs is sunk. So here's hoping the U.S. can get lucky and get one of these Corsairs on the way out. The U.S. fire. Yes! Excellent. We get 1 Corsair. That's a good lucky roll for us. That goes back into the supply. Now, the next part of this is that the Corsairs slip the net of the interception and they move out into the Mediterranean. Let's take a look at how that works. With the Corsairs that have slipped the patrol net, that have gotten out into the Mediterranean, we're going to roll 1 die for each Corsair. And unlike the US forces, which need a 6 to sink a Corsair, in order to successfully raid, the Corsairs only need a die roll of a 5 or a 6. Additionally, the AI rules call for the play of this card, which is one of the Tripoli's battle cards, which basically says, when making a pirate raid with Tripolitan Corsairs, roll 3 additional dice. So Tripoli, by the AI bot rules, is going to use this right away, which means that Tripoli's rolling 7 dice on this initial attack. 5s or 6 gets them a gold coin. Let's roll. Got 3 off the board here. Oh God, that's 2 hits. We'll tally those. Roll these additional 3, 4, 3, 3. So 2 successful hits for the Corsairs, and they get 2 merchant ships captured. So the Corsairs will move back into the harbor of Tripoli. Additionally, the AI rules call for 1 more battle card play in this case, which is this one here, called Merchant Ship Converted. And this says, playable if a Tripolitan pirate raid has just been successful. Place 1 Tripoli Corsair in the harbor of Tripoli. So basically this symbolizes the conversion of a merchant ship to a Corsair. So even though we sunk 1 Tripolitan Corsair, they are back at 5. This ends the spring of 1801. Let's move to the summer of 1801. For the summer of 1801, the US are going to play this card, which is one of our core cards. Swedish frigates arrive. And this says, place 2 Swedish frigates in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli. So we will play and remove this card from the game. Then we will add the 2 Swedish frigates. Hey, to welcome our Swedish friends to the patrol zone around Tripoli. So now we have the effectiveness of 3 frigates outside of Tripoli. Let's move to the summer of 1801 for the Tripoli player. For the Tripoli move, basically the card that comes into play again is this 5 Corsair check. Because Tripoli has 5 Corsairs in the harbor, it is once again going to raid. So we move the Tripoli forces into the harbor, and the US forces now will be rolling with the help of their Swedish friends. So instead of just 2 dice, the US are going to roll 6 dice. 4 yellow Swedish dice and 2 American dice. Let's see how they do. Got 1 hit. 1 hit. So 1-6 takes off 1 Corsair. That's not too bad. That's still pretty much odds on there. So we'll put that one back in the supply, and the rest of the Corsairs slip the net and get out into the Mediterranean to raid. All right, let's see how the forces of Tripoli do in their summer raiding. They get a 5 and a 6, so 2 gold coins again added to the tally, which gives them a grand total of 4. Let's move to the next season. For the US play, we mentioned how we don't really have cards that are helpful as events. We're going to discard this General Eaton Attacks Benghazi card, and with this we're going to take a little bit of a risky ploy. We're going to build a gunboat rather than move frigates. That will put a gunboat in Malta, and these are helpful later as more offensive forces, although they don't help in preventing raiding, which makes it a little bit questionable now, but I think we might be okay, and we can move our 2 frigates in the winter of 1801. So that ends the US turn. Let's go to Tripoli's turn. For the fall of 1801 turn, we'll notice that Tripoli does not have 5 Corsairs in the harbor, and none of the other cards before that come into play yet either. So we are going to draw a card from the top of their deck, and we get this. Move 1 American frigate from any naval patrol zone to the harbor of Malta. So that would take it out of the patrol zone. Now, there's a couple ways we could play this here. Let's see what the rules say. It says if there are exactly 2 American frigates in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli, play immediately. Otherwise, discard to perform a raid or build action. Okay, so in this case, that means basically that the AI rules say if there are 2 frigates here and there are only 1 US frigate right now. So we're going to discard this card and not play it, and instead we're going to go to the Tripoli's raid or build card. And the raid or build card has some specific conditions by which it tells Tripoli whether to raid or to build another Corsair. Let's take a look. It says if a harbor, Algiers, Tangier, Tunis, or Tripoli, has at least 3 Corsairs, this one has 4, so that meets that condition, and more Corsairs than American and Swedish frigates in the corresponding naval patrol zone, raid from that harbor. Otherwise, place a Tripolitan Corsair in the harbor of Tripoli. So because there's more Corsairs than there are frigates, Tripoli will, once again, in the fall of 1801, raid. So let's push them out into the harbor and see if the Swedish and American frigates can do a little bit of damage here. So far, US and Sweden has had good luck with their dice rolls. 6 dice to see if they can hit on some 6s here. One of them's missed. Oh my goodness. Oh, that was a red one. That one doesn't count. But we still have 2 hits here. We'll lock those in and roll 1 more. Even if it knocks it over, a 5. So 2 hits. The US forces have done pretty well here. This was 1 Swedish frigate hit and 1 US hit on those dice rolls. So 2 Corsairs removed to the supply route, leaving Tripoli with only 2 Corsairs in the zone. They'll move out into the raiding area, and let's see how they raid. So Tripoli needs 5s or 6s on these 2 Corsairs. Double 2s. No success here. We've had some pretty good luck so far as the US in kind of holding up Tripoli's raiding here. I thought we'd be in worse shape than 4 gold coins 3/4 of the way through 1801. Let's move to the next season. For the winter of 1801 turn, the US, we're going to discard this Marine Sharpshooters card, which is basically a land-based card that isn't helpful for us right now. And we're going to take advantage of the moving through frigates rule. We're going to move the frigate in the patrol zone of Gibraltar and the frigate in Gibraltar, and we are going to sail them over to Tripoli. This gives us, with the additional 2 US frigates there, 2 Swedish frigates and 3 US frigates here, so a total of 5 frigates outside the harbor of Tripoli. That's a strong position. And the reason we can do this now is that the AI rules, by the nature of the rules, say if it's the winter of 1801, they're going to move those 2 gunboats, those 2 Corsairs, out of Gibraltar anyway. So they were going to move them anyway, so we might as well pull our ships out of there and reinforce our position here. Let's go to the winter of 1801 for Tripoli. And as we mentioned, for the winter of 1801, Tripoli is going to play Murad Race Breaks Out, which is basically move the 2 Tripolitan corsairs from the harbor of Gibraltar to the harbor of Tripoli. We have no American frigates there to intercept, so this will be an automatic move. So these corsairs join the corsairs that are already in Tripoli, giving Tripoli 4 corsairs now in strength. However, that's as 1801 here ends, I feel like that was actually pretty good sequence of events there for the U.S. Considering that we had bad cards, and we've only allowed 4 gold coins for Tripoli. I'm hopeful now, because we're going to draw 6 new cards for the U.S. forces, that we'll get some better cards that can either kind of get us some gold back, or perhaps bring some more frigates into play. And we'll see how this all works out as we go forward. But let's progress to the spring of 1802. At the start of any new year, there's a couple things that happen. First of all, we deal ourselves 6 new cards. Now, normally, if it were a 2-player game, the Tripoli player would get 6 new cards as well, and each player has hands that are concealed from their opponent. But because we're using the AI bot, we don't do that for Tripoli. We're just using their AI bot system. However, for the US player, we get 6 new cards. And taking a look at what we've got here, these 2 cards were the core cards that don't count in our hand total and sit, if you were playing a traditional game, face up that your opponent can see. These 3 cards were the cards that we had left over at the end of last year, and these 6 down here are the new cards we've just drawn. Now there's a hand limit of 8 cards, so we have to reduce our hand by 1 card. And we're going to start by just pulling off this Treaty of Peace and Amity. This is one of the best cards to win the game at the end of the game, but we'll be able to recycle that one in 1805 or 1806 if we absolutely need to. So we're going to move that one out of our hand, leaving us with these 5 new cards and these 3 cards left over from last turn. Now, a couple things. We got better cards this time. First of all, this one here, Constantinople Demands Tribute, forces the Tripoli player to return 2 gold coins to the supply, which can be really helpful if they're getting close. Better yet, we can discard this, and there's another card that we might get next time that allows you to pull a card out of the discard pile and replay it. So if we get this one into the discard pile fast, we might conceivably be able to recycle it again, which could give us 4, and then we could get it again in 1805 or 1806, which could potentially give us a 3rd time to play it, which would remove 6 coins. So this card's very valuable. We want to play this one this year for sure. Tribute Paid here is another useful card. It's not as good of Show of Force. It's the same thing, essentially, of a Show of Force. In other words, it neutralizes an ally of Tripoli, but it comes at the cost of 2 gold coins. So we'll keep this one in case we need it, but I'd rather play this one to stop at least the first attempt by Tripoli to have allies. Naval Movement's a handy card because it allows you to move up to 4 frigates, so that one's good for us. And then this one here, Congress Authorizes Action, which is place 2 American frigates on the following year of the year turn track. We definitely want to play this one this year. There are 2 American frigates still in the supply, and this is how they come into play. So we want to play this one this year so that we'll get 3 frigates in action next year. So that's kind of what we're thinking. So we've got our hand reduced. Let's do the second thing that we need to do at the beginning of a new year. So the second thing that happens at the beginning of a new year is any frigates that are in the year track, this is basically our supply reinforcements, get moved to the harbor of Gibraltar if you're the US player, or to the harbor of Tripoli if you are the Tripolitan player. And we'll take our new frigate then and bring it into Gibraltar, giving us 4 in the region, which is helpful. So for the US player's first move in 1802 spring, we're going to take the 2 frigates in the supply, play the Congress Authorizes Action card, and bring them onto the time track for 1803. That'll give us 3 frigates instead of 1 frigate next year, which will be helpful. And I'm kind of feeling fairly comfortable about our defense of Tripoli right now in terms of intercepting Tripoli corsairs. So let's move to the Tripoli turn. So none of Tripoli's cards come into play, including the 5 Corsair check, because they only have 4. So that means we draw a card from Tripoli's deck, and we get Tripoli Attacks. So this is a move where the Corsairs and frigates that would happen to be in Tripoli's harbor would move out and attack the guarding forces. The AI conditions for this, however, are if there is exactly 1 American frigate in the naval patrol zone of Tripoli, and there are at least 5 dice worth of Tripolitan ships. Corsairs count as 1, frigates count as 2. Play immediately. Otherwise, discard to perform a raid and build action. So that means that we're going to discard the Tripoli Attacks card and instead play raid or build. The conditions on this one basically says if a harbor has at least 3 corsairs, which this does, and more corsairs than corresponding Swedish and American frigates in the corresponding naval patrol zone, raid from that harbor. Otherwise, place a Tripolitan corsair in the harbor of Tripoli. So while they do have 4 corsairs, they don't. They do have at least 3 corsairs. They don't have more than frigates. So that means Tripoli is going to build and increase their raiding corsair force to 5, which will, of course, as we can now see, it's going to trigger a raid in the summer of 1802. Let's continue on to the summer of 1802. So as the US player, I'm not going to screw around. Every time I've played this game solo, Tripoli has come either very close to getting 12 gold coins or gotten 12 gold coins. So I'm going to play as the US player the Constantinople Demands Tribute card, which is the Tripoli player must return 2 gold coins to the supply, which means that takes their total of gold coins from 4 back down to 2. So that's the US play for the summer. Let's go to the Tripoli play for the summer of 1802. Summer of 1802, these conditions come into play for the Tripoli player, the 5 corsair check. Because there are 5 or more corsairs in the harbor of Tripoli, Tripoli performs a pirate raid. So the Tripoli corsairs set sail. The Swedish and US frigates will try to intercept. I've learned that our dice holder can't take more than 5 dice. So we're going to roll 5 at a time twice. Here's the first volley. We need 6s to sink them. It still went off. Well, we got 2. That's a good start. And we'll lock those in place. Roll 1 more. A 1. 2 sunk. That's still a very good shot for the first round. Let's now do the second round for the US frigates. Firing. It's be nice to get a couple more. Get another 6. So a really good round for the US and Swedish frigates, Swedish shooting. We remove 3 corsairs back to the supply, leaving Tripoli very significantly depleted in terms of their raiding capacity. Tripoli, however, does get these 2 corsairs out into the Mediterranean to raid for merchant shipping. They'll get 2 dice rolls. They need 5s or 6s to successfully capture merchant ships. They get a 6, so they pick up 1 new ship, giving them a total of 3 gold coins out of the 12 they need in order to immediately win the game. I feel like the US raiding defense right now is in pretty good shape. Having only 3 gold coins as Tripoli is a pretty good position for us, I think, right now in the fall of 1802. So we're going to discard Lieutenant O'Bannon Leads the Charge, which is actually a good card for land combat, and use it to build Malta, a Malta gunboat. That gives us 2 there. I found these to be really helpful in the late game, and so I'd like to, as soon as possible, get that up to its full strength of 3. Let's go to the fall of 1802 for Tripoli. So none of the raiding conditions apply for Tripoli, or none of the cards before that, so we are going to draw a card for Tripoli. Let's see what we get. Troops to Dern. Playable if Hamet's army has not captured Dern, place 2 Tripolitan infantry in the city of Dern. So just as kind of a little bit of let's move over there, then do a little bit of context on this one. So the AI bot conditions for playing this card basically are if there are no US troops in Dern. If the US hasn't taken Dern yet, then we play this card as Tripoli, which means that we're going to add 2 land units to the city of Dern, giving them a total of 6 instead of 4. This actually isn't very good for us because, and this is kind of to explain, we have to take Dern to get the conditions for a favorable peace treaty for for the U.S. forces. So as we get to 1804 and 1805, we're going to put an army in Alexandria to the east, then move them in here and try to capture Dern. And we have to win that battle. If we don't win that battle, we lose the game. So the Tripoli forces having 4 to 6 is going to make that a little bit harder. Now there's a mechanic that we can do, which is naval bombardment. We can move some of our frigates into the harbor of Dern and bomb these land forces. At some point, we'll probably want to do that to reduce these numbers from 6 down to 4. But that's a situation that we'll deal with as we get later into the game, towards 1804 and 1805. For right now, we just have to make note that the Dern land forces are stronger than we would have liked or hoped. As the US player for our final move of 1802, We're going to discard this naval movement card. There's a number of these in the deck, so I think if we get more, we can get more if we absolutely need them. It's a handy card to have, but I don't think we need it now, and I don't think we still have to worry too much about Tripoli raiding. So I think we've got some kind of the opportunities here to really build up our offensive forces for later. So in discarding the naval movement card, we are going to add our third and final gunboat to Malta. And these gunboats, by the way, are very handy because we mentioned about the naval bombardment. We can take them with us on naval bombardment, so that's going to give us 3 extra dice rolls every time they're involved in combat, so they can be extremely helpful and used a lot of times as the game goes forward. So to be able to have them all in place at the end of 1802, I feel like that puts us in a strong position for the last 4 years of the game coming up. Let's go to Tripoli's turn to finish up the year 1802. So once again, as Tripoli finishes up 1802, they do not have enough Corsairs to raid, and none of the other cards come into play yet. So they are going to draw a card. Tunis declares war. So this is a card that's played immediately, and it's placed 3 Tunisian Corsairs in the harbor of Tunis. So basically, Tunis has joined the war on Tripoli's side. So let's go take care of that. So Tunis lies to the northwest of Tripoli, and what we'll basically do is take 3 of these orange Corsairs, symbolizing the allies of Tripoli. So Tunis has joined the war in Tripoli's side. We're now fighting against both Tripoli and Tunis. But you may recall that I talked about this card here, the Show of Force card, which basically says move 3 American frigates to the harbor of an active ally of Tripoli, return all of the Corsairs from the harbor to the supply. So this card allows us to neutralize one of the allies of Tripoli right away. We want to take them out of play quickly, so we'll play this most likely as our first card in 1803. However, with that being said, let's wrap up this episode here. We're close to a half an hour now. We will probably do about 2 years per episode, depending on how things play out. A game can end well before 1806, and if things go south on us quickly, then we may see that very well happen. But looking kind of just a spot reflection on how we've done so far, we've had some really favorable dice rolls, I think, as the American and Swedish frigates trying to contain the Tripoli Corsairs in their raiding. I mean, we've sunk a lot of them. I've never played the game and been in such good shape in terms of rating at the end of 1802. For Tripoli to only have 3 gold coins at this point in the game, that's pretty. I feel like that's the best we've done as the U.S. forces so far in playing this game. Now, a couple things. We know in 1803, we're going to lose our Swedish frigates. There's a card that Tripoli's going to play, and they're going to gain 2 gold coins while they do that. So the situation's going to change pretty quickly, and our protecting fleet in the patrol zone of Tripoli is going to get immediately weaker as we continue on in the game here. So things can change pretty quickly, and all it takes is a few cards and a few dice rolls and a few mistakes, and our situation here can go from, I'd say, comfortable to precarious pretty quickly. So we'll be back in episode 2 with the continuation of the Shores of Tripoli with the First Barbary War. If you've enjoyed this, please give it a thumbs up. If you're new, please consider subscribing. If you have ideas and thoughts on strategies or questions about the game, please feel free to drop them down in the comments, and we'll see you in about 2 or 3 days for the next episode. Take care, everybody.